I think retailers are refocusing on their stores. I think there are going to be winners and losers that shake out over the next several years. And I think the winners are going to be the ones that lean into their stores. I think lean into technology that can help improve the store associate, store manager experience in stores, which then will create a better brand ambassador to interact with customers.
All right, well, Ian Fredericks, welcome. Thanks for joining me on the podcast here. Pleasure to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. I really appreciate it.
So a lot of what we're going to talk about today for people who tune in, talking about someone who's had a long career and expertise in retail, including, I think I saw expert witness, which maybe we get into that on your LinkedIn. Kind of a fun little side thing. I've tried that as well. But mostly kind of making a difference for large retailers with some disruption and transformation in the software space recently is kind of making news. I'd love to talk about that. But maybe for starters, let's hear about just kind of your background, what got us to here and got you started in the SaaS world.
Yeah, sure. So I was actually trained a long time ago as a lawyer. So my background was distressed M&A and corporate restructuring. I did that for about 8 years before I went in-house at Hilco and then moved over into our retail business in 2015. So I've been in the retail business now for 9 years. Really learned retail taking apart Circuit City back when it filed in 2008. And I was kind of left to unwind that business over the course of about 3 years and really got into the weeds on how retailers work, what works, what doesn't work, and understanding all the different ins and outs of retail. And that sort of propelled me into Hilco, then ultimately into the retail business. And ever since I joined the retail business, I've been really looking for ways to try to help retailers, in what's an ever-changing environment. And most recently, we've developed, with the help of your firm on the development side, technology that we believe can really help retailers improve in-store execution, drive better revenue, margins, bottom line, et cetera. So that's kind of where we're at now.
So like state of the market, what are the headwinds retailers are facing that make something like this important and a difference maker for them?
Yeah, look, I think that, maybe a little bit of context before we sort of get to the headwinds. Over the last, so call it since, roughly 2018, if you look at retail sales in the United States, they're obviously in the trillions. It's one of the biggest components of our overall economy. Depending on, if you just look at it and you exclude restaurants and sort of the food industry, you are looking at e-commerce sales making up only about 15 to 16% of aggregate retail sales. And that's even during the peak period, although it was a few percentage points higher, the peak of e-commerce, which really happened during COVID in that second quarter of 2020 when things shut down. And then it sort of, stabilized a little bit lower than that. If you exclude things like motor vehicles, parts, gas stations, even grocery, things that people don't necessarily think of as retail, e-commerce sales still only make up about 25% of overall retail sales, and that's including Amazon and Walmart.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you look at where investment has been in technology, it's actually inverted. Overall investment in technology in the retail space, excluding Amazon and Walmart, only lands at about 15% in store. So 85% of the investment in technology has really been in the e-commerce side of things, yet it's only making up anywhere between 15 to 25%, depending on how you're looking at it, of aggregate retail sales. So, I really view that as a big investment misalignment. And, so that in and of itself has created headwinds, because I think one of the things that came out of COVID became very difficult to, if not impossible, to really run e-commerce retail profitably. And that's assuming you're including all of the associated costs. I mean, there's a reason why Amazon bought Whole Foods, why Amazon opened stores, why Walmart still has all of their stores. And, despite the attempts at growth in e-commerce, it's because the vast majority of sales happen there. Your cost structure is much more stable and less variable. Whereas on the e-commerce side, it's highly variable, and it's variable in more, in more spaces than, in the sort of brick and mortar environment. And you have much higher input costs. So typically the cheapest labor out there is usually retail, sales, and brick and mortar. But conversely, if you need labor in e-commerce, you need it at the fulfillment center. And so you're competing against the likes of Amazon and Walmart, which are driving up those costs. So even your labor costs are much higher on the e-commerce side than they are, in brick and mortar. So, that's a major headwind that is confronting retail is how do I go back into or focus on stores? I've spent all this money on the investment over here. Where do I get the capital to invest in my retail stores so that I can, experience, or reach profitability in the area where I'm actually doing the vast majority of my sales?
Yeah.
So, sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's great. I feel like we've talked about this in the past, and it's kind of a mind-blowing stat. And I feel like it would surprise virtually everyone listening who maybe isn't an executive at a retail chain that so much of it still happens in store. The conventional wisdom has been, malls are dying and everything's going online, and it kind of isn't. And even I think I saw, Costco is a $650 billion company, and all these companies are really optimizing their in-store experiences, are kind of reaping those rewards. Maybe that's part of what kind of getting to some of the headwinds is. Do you feel like, talking about kind of the battle for labor, the conventional wisdom out there is that it's hard to find people that are going to be able to execute on this stuff? Is that a true thing? Is that when retailers think about, investing in people, is that as important as maybe it seems?
If you think about your brick and mortar stores and what people who join retail workforces are looking for, right? You generally have people that love the brand, right? So the reason why they go to work at a particular retailer more often than not is the fact that they want the benefit of the employee discount, right? And so they'll go work in that retailer because they wear the clothes, they're a big fan of the brand, they buy the furniture, they eat the food if you even go into the restaurant side of it. They often want the benefits that come along with working at that particular retailer. In that respect, they're also your brand ambassadors, right? They're the ones who are interfacing with your customers the most. So, I think one of the things that retailers have gone away from is really investing in making sure that frontline has the resources they need to be able to service customers in the best possible way, but also not spend unnecessary amount of times on either low value tasks or things that just need to be done to sort of check the box, and really sort of looking at it and saying, okay, this is my frontline ambassador. I want these people to be happy. If they're happy, the customer is going to have a better experience. I'm also going to have a happy customer in my store, in terms of my labor force, because they joined because they most likely saw something. There was something of value in them in getting the benefits of working for that particular, retailer. So I think there's been a big movement away from that. And if you look at what happened during the pandemic as an exaggeration sort of what the demands are that are put on that frontline workforce, there was a term that came out of the pandemic called micro fulfillment centers. And essentially the way that retailers were starting to look at their stores where they were just micro fulfillment centers. We could fulfill, you could buy online, you could pick up in store, you could buy online, fulfill from store, you could buy online, return to store. Well, they didn't add more labor hours. In fact, many retailers took labor hours away from stores, but added all of this additional work associated with things where the sales didn't even originate in the stores. They originated online. The stores weren't even necessarily getting credit for those sales. And you're asking them to do all of this labor that is not customarily done. And that stuff has stuck because the consumer wanted it, right? It may not be as voluminous as it was during the pandemic, but it's stuck. And yet they just keep shrinking the labor hours. So I think refocusing on those frontline teams, this is something that, we've been really focused on, in our business and in terms of the technology we've been developing, and trying to change the paradigm of how retailers do business in their stores, how you interact with your frontline teams, how you get feedback from them, how you take and use feedback from them, really creating sort of a bit of a feedback loop that doesn't currently exist the way that retailers are structured from a store operational standpoint, from bottom all the way up to the top of corporate.
So think about it from a change management point of view. What are the things that retailers have to maybe rethink as those things change to adopt some of these new practices or technology?
Sure, it's a great question. I've given probably more thought to it than than I ever imagined I would. I actually am of the view that the current retail operational structure needs to be reworked. It's existed, and I'll elaborate in a second. It's existed the same way for decades, right? If you think about how retail brick and mortar, from a personnel standpoint, is structured, it's very much a pyramid, right? If you start at the bottom, you have your store associates. You have maybe what they call key holders. You have assistant store managers. You have store managers. You have district managers. You might have regional managers. You have junior corporate team. You have mid-level corporate team. You have senior, maybe a head of stores. And then that person might roll up into your chief operating officer and then your CEO. So very much a pyramid. You're going to have your most in your store associates, and then it's going to go up. Well, if you think about how decisions and feedback flows in that paradigm, obviously your CEO sets your strategy. Your CEO is responsible for your operations. That operations may span across e-commerce and brick and mortar and other things. You get to your head of stores. Anything that comes from, the CEO, COO, head of stores that has to go to stores goes through that entire channel. And it goes all the way down to the store associates. And usually there isn't much that comes back up from store associates in terms of feedback relative to how that was received. It's also very difficult along the way to make sure that the message is clearly communicated and also validate and respond or react to, did what we actually want to get done? And if it got done, did it get done everywhere? Did it get done in the right time frame? Is it actually working? How do you validate that? Well, typically the way that you validate it is, let's just say the CEO said, I want to know how that particular project is working out. It goes all the way down the chain, comes back up the chain. Along the way, it's filtered, because nobody ever wants to deliver bad news to the CEO. The CEO gets the response, everything's going great, and that's the way that it moves. That's a broken model from my perspective. That's the way that the model has existed for multiple decades. But we have technology now that can, number one, I think, change the way that retail, that pyramid is constructed, and provide the information, make the information readily available to everyone. Take that information and also convert it into, from what I'll call qualitative information as opposed to quantitative information, convert that into quantitative information and compare that information also with your financial results. Because right now, a lot of the data that comes out of brick and mortar stores or retail in general rolls through a POS system, or it might roll through things like, traffic counters. How many people are coming into the store? Is traffic up? Is traffic down? What are my conversions? All of those things. You get all of that, but what you don't understand is the why. Why is my traffic down? Why are my conversions down? Why are my conversions up? If they're up, how can I replicate that in areas where my conversions are down? Why are my financial results showing what they're showing? Is the promotion that we're actually offering, is that up in all of the stores? Because I have this mismatch where, my margins aren't running consistent across stores. Why aren't they running consistent?
Yeah.
If you could take that quantitative information and understand qualitatively why it's happening and put those two together, that's something that's never existed before.
Right.
And so doing all of that, and I think eliminating or altering drastically what I'll call your mid-management in retail, from above the stores, below sort of corporate, that regional district manager thing, I think that model's broken. It's very hard to find a handful of really good people. It's that much harder to find multiples of those really good people. Instead, what I think would be better off is creating I took this term from a book, but a retail SWAT team. Have small groups that can go in, and if you understand what's actually really going on in stores, you have more visibility into them, then you can position your people where they have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is with these SWAT teams, people that are highly skilled, highly experienced at executing, and you can deploy them into stores or districts or regions where they can have an outsized impact in a short period of time and then repurpose them to the next place. If you did that instead of spreading your district management teams and having them show up in stores where maybe they don't even need to go, I think that's a completely different way to operate and run stores, and I think just far more effective.
No, absolutely. And I think, anyone sympathizes with that idea that in the war for talent, there are only so many people who are, super overachievers and can drive the business and understand where you're going. Like I always like make the argument that, technology offers you the ability to scale the few really, really great people that you
Yep.
have. You're talking about like rethinking the traditional retail org. They might be looking at a whole bunch of, I think you said 7 or 8 layers. I can't remember how many there were, but there are a
Yeah,
lot
it's a lot.
that they're just there to relay messages in some cases. And one of the things that you've told me in the past that kind of blows my mind is that when you go into a struggling, chain, it's often the case that the worst performing stores are just the ones not running the basic playbook. And I think you've got like a worst to first kind of story that maybe applies there. I feel like that applies to a lot of kind of companies, but like retail especially, where we're all kind of the same all across the country of the world. And if we would just do these, 22 things right, we'll at least be, above average.
It's crazy because I'm not even sure the number's 22. That might be too big, but I sympathize with operators in retail, right? If you go back to where's the investment been, where's the excitement been, it hasn't been in stores. So if you're a store operator, it's a tough place to be because you're not necessarily getting the capital. People aren't excited about it. It's not moving the needle if you're a public and in terms of what analysts want to hear or private equity want to hear. They all want to talk about omni-channel and e-commerce. And the thing is, what makes retail successful in stores hasn't really changed all that much. What I say is you have to get back to basics. The challenge with that message, if you're internally at a retailer and you say, you know what, we need to get back to the basics of retailing, and you try to deliver that message to a senior executive within retail, if somebody delivered that message to me on my team, I would say, well, wait a second, you're telling me we're not doing the basics?
Yeah.
Like, why aren't the basics? I didn't think I even had to ask for that. I thought that was just a given. And so how do you influence that level of change to say, okay, we got to redo the basics, but not have to deliver that message to senior executives? That's tough. Now, from my perspective, one of the things that I think is great from a management standpoint as a manager is you want to encourage people to be open and transparent about what the problems are. It's not uncommon to move away from the basics because everybody thinks they're being done. So having senior managers who are open and receptive to tell me what's really wrong and how I can really fix it. And I don't care what the message is. Nobody's going to be penalized. I just want to know what can be done to get us back on track. I don't care what the answer is. And then when you get the answer, receiving that information and having a positive response, I think that will be huge to actually solving the problem. That's definitely more difficult than I just made it sound. So.
No, and it's a mindset thing, because I think you're right. It seems like it's either how we're not doing this or the fingers pointed back at me. So, if you were advising a retail executive to say, like, here are some new ideas about how to adopt some new ways of operating, some new ways of using technology. Like, what are the things that seem to be the most successful, that kind of message?
What we've created, and we started doing it for ourselves to try to, when we're running stores, for clients, to improve our own execution. And I think one of the things that our teams do really well is go back to basics. We have some other tricks up our sleeve that work under different circumstances. But the reality is a lot of what we do is take a retail store back to the basics of retailing. What we created, it was essentially a virtual store management platform. So a way for us to manage stores the way we want them to be managed, that's going to yield the best benefit. That we built that originally for ourselves. It gave us a two-way feedback loop between the store teams, which often still worked for the retailers, and our team that we would put in the field, and allowed those two to interact regularly and frequently, but also for our corporate team to have visibility into the numbers. The same things we do on our projects, where we're looking at all the numbers and trying to understand what's going on in the stores, the why behind the numbers. We built all of that for ourselves. We then had a client during COVID who was struggling getting into stores, their own stores, and asked us how we were doing what we were doing. And we told them, look, we built this platform for ourselves. They asked us if they could pilot it. We weren't really set up at that point in time to have a client in there. We maneuvered, made it work. They used it for a couple weeks. They saw staggering changes in results. They started in just their shoe department. Okay. And the numbers went off the charts when they actually were able to implement what corporate wanted to do. in the stores, and then also receive feedback from the teams about what was working and what wasn't working, and then be able to make decisions off that. They then rolled it out to the chain. So that was our first client. They're still a client today. They were ultimately acquired by a larger retail conglomerate. That retail conglomerates then rolled it out to other, brands or nameplates within that. It's now set up as two things. We have the virtual store management platform, and then we have what we're calling, Rev Up, which has a dual meaning in terms of revving up your operations and also increasing revenue, where we combine our expertise and the virtual store management platform, which is called Restore for Retail, put those two together, for Rev Up, which is what we're calling a tech-enabled service. So we have a sort of SaaS platform in Restore for Retail, and we have a tech-enabled service that combines our expertise, in the virtual store management platform.
Very cool. So maybe a changing direction a little bit. I'd be curious to see what you think the next, let's say, 3 years has in store for retail. Like, what kind of trends are happening, and what on the software side do you think you have in mind to help meet those new challenges?
Sure. So what I would say are two things. So one, and this has probably started within the last year, I think retailers are refocusing on their stores. I think there are going to be winners and losers that shake out over the next several years. And I think the winners are going to be the ones that lean into their stores. I think lean into technology that can help improve the store manager experience in stores, which then will create a better brand ambassador to interact with customers. I think you're going to see more and more of a move away from just e-commerce, more omni-channel, but also saying, okay, my e-commerce business, I really want to look at that as a store or a handful of stores. How does it perform relative to the rest of my chain? You need an e-commerce business, but it's not going to take over stores, certainly not in the next 3 years. And I think probably, never will. And then I think one of the things, and it's, all the buzz now, is around AI. AI is still in its infancy, even, as advanced as ChatGPT being sort of the name that's on, that everybody can point to. It's still very much in its infancy. Figuring out how to integrate that as a tool for retail will be something that is going to happen, I think, in a big way over the next 3 years. I think one of the big risks is there are a lot of firms out there that are selling an AI type solution. And it's amazing how much it pivoted. I mean, if you walk through an airport now, or, the emails, the junk mail that you get daily in your email inbox, whether you're in the space like you or in, retail like I am, everything is AI. The reality is it's nowhere near as advanced as people are selling it to be. One of the things that came out, and there was an article about it, and then I also, after I was talking about AI at a conference, I left the conference, got in an Uber, and the person had the radio on, and, there was some commentary around Amazon, and I think it's called their Amazon Go stores. So the stores where you can, in theory, just walk right in.
Yeah.
You have your credit card on file. It registers you going in, you pick up all the stuff on the shelf, and you walk out, and it's a completely seamless experience. The reality is they have some AI through the cameras that's doing some of that, but it's all being validated by people. They have,
I saw that too. It's hysterical. Yeah.
And so it's like, even companies where you think, oh man, they're so advanced and they're doing all this stuff. The reality is they're still using people to validate it. Yeah. So I think people need to be careful in what they're going to invest in AI. Go small. Try to solve one problem with it first. See how that problem is solved, as opposed to trying to take on these massive changes in your organization. And we're going to have AI do this and AI do that. The reality is you're going to fail because the project's too big. The technology's in too much of an infancy state. So I think being cautious, but looking for ways to improve your business using AI is the approach that you should take. And I think that's going to be a big part of the next 3 years or more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us too, we've seen the same thing. And I think that, there are some elements that AI can perform really, really effectively in, and others where it's super dangerous and you would never want, I don't want to, pick an important thing. I don't want to have an AI pick my one number out of the spreadsheet that I'm going to make all my bets on. But, some of the marketing stuff, and I could see some of the, we're all still experimenting with what that is, but the overinvestment bubble is going to pop for sure. And then we'll all figure out what's real and do something intelligent with it. And that's coming soon. I think sooner than we think, probably.
Yeah, and look, I know that we're looking at, some things, with our technology where we're bringing AI in, we're testing some things that we think are useful to retailers and especially useful in a store management context. And, but I want to make sure that what we're able to deliver to our clients is going to be, number one, purpose built, but also that reliable for them. So it's important to me that it can fill those two, because otherwise, like you just said, people are going to start to put more and more emphasis on it and make more and more decisions on it. It's got to be right. If it's not, then then it's not serving its intended purpose.
Yeah, I think the answer is the path is to experiment and see what works, because you can't put your head in the sand or it's going to pass you by, right?
Yep.
And you can't fully invest. So this is a pretty, you can call it an exciting or a dangerous time, depending on
it's probably both.
Right, it's probably both. And so I think the people who are smart, like as you just said, the people who are smart and like plot a path that like has some guardrails on it, or thinking through purpose-built solutions for a reason, this will make a difference. All that kind of stuff it has huge benefits on the other side. We just got to be kind of smart about how we do that, kind of step by step.
Yep, I couldn't agree more.
So Chris, maybe kind of wrap things up here. Any parting words of advice for retailers kind of thinking about transforming their business with technology? Like, what are some things you think will make a successful executive over the next few years?
From a technology standpoint, to me, it's really about finding things that are going to benefit your stores, benefit your store teams. I mean, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse a little bit here, but really saying, okay, how can I improve the lives of the people that are in my stores? Because if I have happy associates, happy managers in my stores, I'm going to have happy customers. And the other thing is, I think we've been very much on a growth for growth's sake trajectory. We want growth. Especially in mature businesses, growth is not going to come in top line. What you really should be focusing on trying to grow in a retail environment is your margins. And one of the ways you can do that, is by really focusing on, like I said, your brand ambassadors, your store associates in the stores, as well as, looking for better ways or faster ways to turn your inventory at lower discounts. And you can do that by executing flawlessly in your stores. And there is technology, we've built it, we use it, that can create that environment within a store so that you're not having to discount as much. You're capturing better margins. If you focus on your margin growth instead of growth for growth's sakes on the revenue side, you're going to have a healthier business. Any incremental dollar of margin that you can just drops right to the bottom line.
Absolutely.
That's where I would focus, and I'd find technology that's going to help make you execute in stores better and create a better experience for your store teams and your customers.
Well, some real gems about margin and EBITDA at the end there. That's great. I appreciate that. Well, great.
I mean, that's what we're doing. We are capitalists at the end of the day. That's what we're doing this for.
We're trying to make some money here. Well, cool. Thanks for joining me for this conversation. It's fun, informative, and hope you had a good time doing it.
I did. I really appreciate it, Mike. It was great catching up with you as always. Thank you.
Cool.